Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. A closer look inside the alleged Sarah Lawrence college sex cult.
Can I get up now?
Alicia, stop talking.
Plus, a victim's family member takes the stand in the trial of ex-ICU doctor William Husel.
I didn't understand how we got from stable to the ICU for continued care to he's dead. He's dead, we should just pull the plug.
And 62 years after her remains were found, the so-called Little Miss Nobody is identified. But first, the murder of NBA star Lorenzen Wright.
It took an evil heart to do this.
There's no way to sit up and say something bad about Lorenzen Wright. This case ain't about him. This case is about Billy Ray Turner.
More than a decade later, accused killer Billy Ray Turner stands trial. Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin. More than a decade after the murder of famed NBA player Lorenzen Wright, opening statements are presented in the trial of his accused murderer. Billy Ray Turner faces multiple charges, including first-degree murder in Wright's 2010 death. Prosecutors say Wright's ex-wife, Shara Wright, recruited Turner to shoot and kill her husband. They say Shara Wright was after her husband's $2 million life insurance policy. Lorenzen Wright's body was discovered in Tennessee in 2010. 7 years later, the murder weapon was recovered in a Mississippi lake. Shara Wright was later charged in her ex-husband's murder. She's currently serving a 30-year sentence after accepting a plea deal to facilitating murder. In opening statements on Tuesday, prosecutors pointed the finger at Shara Wright, but said Turner is still guilty of the crime.
Evil in the heart. It took an evil heart to do this. And I'm not talking about Billy Turner's heart. I'm not talking about him. It took a particularly evil heart, one that was filled with jealousy, with desperation, with hurt, with greed, and literally 2 million reasons to want him dead. I'm talking about Shara Wright, Lorenzen's ex-wife.
Turner's defense attorneys followed, dropping a racial slur in the defense's opening statements.
The desperation in here is so clear that it's that I really don't know what to expect. I know that they're gonna probably bring somebody who says, Billy, who's sitting over in the jail watching this, waiting on this day to get before y'all, said, man, Sheriff Clinton, I shot that for her. I expect that to be said. But before you make your decision up on that, wait till you hear the rebuttal side of that. There's no way to sit up and say something bad about Lorenzen Wright. He's a great guy. This case, with all due respect to his family and his friends and his fraternity brothers and his close loved ones, this case ain't about him. This case is about Billy Ray Turner.
Joining us today to discuss opening statements in Billy Ray Turner's trial is legal analyst Dina Dahl and Terry Austin. Dina, what's connecting Turner to Wright's murder, and is Shara a reliable witness to say that Wright was involved?
Essentially, what is connecting him are his two co-conspirators, one indicted, which is Shara, and the second one, Jimmy Martin, which was not indicted. Those two are the ones that gave information to the police that prosecution is using. Jimmy said where the weapon was found and said that, Billy Ray Turner was the one that used the weapon. All three of them planned this as a way of gaining his insurance money, the prosecution said. But there isn't a lot of other evidence that connects them. So whether or not the jury believe these witnesses or think that these are self-serving statements on them is really what will decide this trial.
Yeah, it seems like reliability is at the heart of this case. We'll see how that plays out. Terry, you watched the opening statements in this case. What are your thoughts about the openings?
Well, I thought the prosecution, as you saw in that clip, was very slow, but at least he was deliberate. He was a little bit soft-spoken. I think the jury was probably straining to hear what he had to say, but it was logical. It was sequential. The opening that I thought was the worst defense opening I think I've ever heard bar none, was the defense opening in this case. John Keith Perry is his name, and he was rambling, he was confusing, he was mentioning names and not connecting those names to who those people were. And he basically confused the jury. The other thing is he used language that was offensive. You saw in that clip, he even used the N-word, and I've never, ever seen an attorney do that. And frankly, I thought we would get an objection, but we didn't. So we'll see how the case goes. He probably shouldn't have done an opening at all.
Yeah, maybe confusion is his tactic in this case. Of course, see how that plays out, and we're covering this case on Law and Crime Network for Gavel to Gavel coverage. Now, the man accused of shooting at least 5 homeless people between Washington, D.C. and New York City is taken into custody. Law and Crime Daily first brought you this story earlier this week as police search for this man, wanted in multiple attacks, 2 of which ended in murder. On Tuesday, police announced 30-year-old Gerald Brevard III was taken into custody in Washington, D.C. Investigators say Brevard has a history of misdemeanors, felonies, and mental health issues. Officials believe the attacks happened between March 3rd and 12th, as Brevard targeted homeless people in both Washington, D.C. and New York. And an arrest for another incident that happened in New York. A man is taken into custody in Philadelphia Tuesday morning for allegedly stabbing 2 workers at the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan, New York, over the weekend. Investigators say Gary Cabana got upset over his membership to the museum being revoked before jumping the counter and attacking several of the workers. A man and a woman were stabbed and taken to the hospital. They're expected to be okay. Police say he faces charges in the stabbings, but they say he will also be charged for starting a fire in a hotel room at a Best Western on Monday, which caused extensive damage. Police say they found Cabana sleeping on a bench near a bus station Tuesday morning when they took him into custody. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, a victim's family member takes the stand as an ex-ICU doctor is on trial for the murder of multiple patients. But first, Little Miss Nobody, no more. 6 decades after a young girl's remains are discovered, Arizona authorities identify the victim.
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law and Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law and Crime Network with YouTubeTV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTubeTV today and then locate Law and Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law and Crime every day with YouTubeTV. We put you in the jury box.
Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. 62 years after a girl's body is found in Arizona, detectives can finally name her thanks to DNA technology. Law and Crime's Angela Levy is here with the sad story of Sharon Lee Gallegos.
Brian, this is incredibly sad. For 62 years, Sharon Lee Gallegos was referred to as Little Miss Nobody. Her identity was a mystery until DNA technology was used to identify her, along with genetic testing. Now, Yavapai County Sheriff's officials held a press conference Tuesday morning to discuss the work that was done to identify Sharon. She was just 4 years old, going on 5, when she was kidnapped from the backyard of her grandmother's home in Alamogordo, New Mexico, on July 21st, 1960. Sheriff's officials say a man looking for rocks found her partially buried body 11 days later. That's about 8.5 hours away near Prescott, Arizona. Othram Labs conducted DNA testing analysis on the remains, which led to the positive identification.
We still have work to do in this case. We would still like to identify the people who took her. We would still like to be able to answer the questions, what happened in those 10 days from the time she was taken to the time she was found. So we are still working. We have Detective Scott Perry here today. Detective Perry and our volunteer investigator, Deborah West, have been hard at work on that ever since we got this name, and they continue to work on that. And we're hoping that maybe somebody today might see this and might have some information about that July 21st day in Alamogordo, New Mexico, and what happened.
And the sheriff says they are particularly interested in speaking to two children who may have been in the car carrying the man and woman who kidnapped Sharon. That was believed to be either a green Dodge or Chrysler model car that was from the 1950s. Now, police believe at the time that the white man and white woman who were in that car had actually been stalking Sharon for about a week before they abducted her. Brian.
Thanks, Anjanette. Back to break down new information in the case of Little Miss Nobody No More is legal analyst Dina Dahl and Terry Austin. Terry, did the presser answer all of your questions, or are there still some mysteries to be solved?
I've got to say, Brian, I still have so many questions based on that presser. It was about an hour long, which is pretty long for that type of presser. They talked a very long time about how difficult it was to identify remains back during the 60s. And that is the reason why it took so long with all of the DNA that they now have and the techniques that they now have. But I still want to know what was her exact cause of death. And I think great that the family now has some closure as far as who she was, but they don't know how she died and they don't know who killed her. So they still have a lot of work to do. And the other question that I have is, why did they name her Little Miss Nobody? They could have given her a name like, you know, the Little Angel or something to that effect. I just think it says such a negative connotation. They did give her a burial and they did say some words and they did have 70 mourners come to her funeral. So I think that was good.
Yeah. Now, Dina, Terry kind of touched on this a bit, but what does this presser tell us about the advances in DNA and the closure that it can bring to families over 60 years later?
It's pretty amazing because she was found 10 days after now we know she disappeared. You would think that maybe they could have tied it back then. But what they did back then was compare the footprints of the remains that they found with this disappeared girl, and they determined that they didn't match. That, and they had the age wrong. They thought the remains were about 7 years old, and she was in fact 4. So it goes to show how important it is, the tools that we use, or prosecutors, law enforcement use to evaluate the evidence that they received. The fact that we are now, in this advanced DNA world, the same remains and the same facts have a completely different result.
Absolutely. Now, Anjanette, what do we know about the circumstances surrounding Sharon's disappearance?
Well, very little. As I mentioned, we had there was this couple in a green car, and they had abducted her and offered her candy, apparently, and to buy her clothes, and she said no. And then her cousin said that she was actually snatched there out of the alleyway. And it's an incredibly sad case. Her nephew, who would have been Sharon's nephew, was there today, and he says it's not clear yet whether or not they'll decide to take her remains back to Arizona or leave them there in New Mexico, where the community came together to bury her back so many years ago.
Interesting. Thank you, Anjanette, for the update, and thank you both, Terry and Dina, for your contribution. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, we head to federal court where the accused Sarah Lawrence sex cult leader stands trial. Plus, patient comfort or cold-blooded murderer. For the first time, we're hearing from victims' family members in the case of ex-ICU doctor William Husel. Welcome back. We continue to follow a case involving the deaths of over a dozen people in Columbus, Ohio, as a former doctor faces murder charges for allegedly killing his patients. On Tuesday, for the first time, jurors heard from family members of the alleged victims. William Hussel is accused of giving 14 patients excessive amounts of fentanyl and other drugs between 2015 and 2018. Prosecutors allege that led to their deaths. His defense team argues he was giving end-of-life care. Over the last 2 weeks, jurors had only heard from medical professionals, including pharmacists, nurses, and other physicians, some of whom worked alongside Hussel. On Tuesday, an alleged victim's stepdaughter took the stand. Maria Havens now works in healthcare and was in nursing school in 2018. She told the jury what happened the night her stepfather died.
What happened once you walked into the room? It's very vivid. So I remember standing at the edge of Troy's bed, and my mom was to my right. William Hussel was off to my left, and he said that he was 99.9% sure that Troy was in total organ failure. William Hussel said that he could give Troy something to make him comfortable and remove the tube. anyone tell you what medication they were going to be giving Troy? No. Did they tell you how much of any medications they'd be giving him? No. I could make somewhat sense of what was being told to us, but I didn't understand how we got from stable to the ICU for continued care to he's dead, we should just pull the plug. Hindsight 2020, I wish I would have said something, but I think maybe at that moment I wasn't feeling as medically knowledgeable and felt more like a stepdaughter trusting this provider, but I didn't understand exactly how we got there.
Legal analyst Dina Dahl and co-host Terry Austin join us again as we dive into the alleged deadly doctor. Terry, the testimony in the case has turned from medical to personal. How do you imagine that's changing the trial and even the kind of environment in the courtroom?
You know what? I think that was a poor strategy on the part of the prosecution. They should have, in my opinion, put the parties first, put the victims first, put the individuals who have a personal connection, because that way you can get the jury to understand the emotion behind the case. When you put on the medical professionals first, sometimes it glosses over the eyes of the jury. Not only that, but if they had heard the people who were affected first, it might actually affect how they look at those doctors. Because remember, those doctors and nurses really do relate to the defendant. They relate to Hussel because they've made those decisions themselves. And if you saw the family first, you might think, are you being credible? So I think it was a poor strategy.
Yeah. Now, Dina, was there anything in the direct of this witness that made you think Hussel's a murderer and not giving comfort care?
I think one of the most crucial things that she said was that another doctor had told the family not that long before that he was stable. So he goes from stable to organ failure within a very short period of time. And so, his defense has always been he was trying to comfort them. This, I think, was the first kind of piece of evidence that might go to a little bit more of a malicious acting on his part. So I thought that was useful for her. And remember, these 14, he's charged with 14 deaths. They each have to be proved. So this is also just very helpful for this particular victim that he hastened his death.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this is not only a witness in the sense that this is a family member, but she also has a bit of medical knowledge as well. So I think the prosecution would be smart to kind of double dip on this witness to help the prosecution push towards that goal of guilty. Now, when we come back, the accused Sarah Lawrence College cult leader stands trial in federal court. We show you the disturbing video of life inside the notorious cult. That's next on Law and Crime Daily. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. The Sarah Lawrence College sex cult trial is delayed twice on Tuesday as accused cult leader Lawrence Wright suffers back-to-back seizures. Court was delayed Tuesday morning after Wright suffered a seizure while being held in a Brooklyn jail. The trial paused again Tuesday afternoon when he suffered another seizure. Wright faces 17 charges, including racketeering and sex trafficking charges, among others. All this stems from allegations dating back to 2010, when prosecutors say Ray moved in with his daughter, who was a student at Sarah Lawrence College. Officials say Ray befriended several students and abused them for upwards of 10 years. Prosecutors say he extorted money from the students, forced them into sex and prostitution, and even held manipulative therapy sessions. This week, jurors were shown one of Ray's personal recordings showing what appears to be one of the therapy sessions.
Stop making noise. Stop making noise. I want to get up! Stop making noise, Felicia. Yeah, fine! Stop making noise. Yes! Stop making noise. This is how much you love me, huh? Yes! Yeah, clearly. No! Stop. I want to get up! I'm going to be fine! You are being so selfish and such a brat. Stop it. Okay, fine. Stop making noise. Why can't I talk to you? Stop making noise. Fine! Happy normal.
This is going on for like just about 7 hours, 6.5 to 7 hours. Non-stop.
Non-stop. That's it.
Everything that comes out of her mouth, everything she says is a lie.
Yes.
And it's really to deceive.
Federal jurors were shown that disturbing video this week, and also heard testimony that Ray made some of his victims wear diapers. Does this sort of evidence really push the needle for the prosecution's case?
Absolutely. I mean, the video itself, we can hear him. He knows what's happening. This is exactly what the expert talked about in the case. The grooming, the coercion, and so the jurors are seeing that in real time. And then also the details about the diapers. I mean, this case comes down to credibility, right? He said versus kind of they said. And so all that video, as detailed as they can get, makes their testimony much more believable to the jury.
Yeah, especially when you're looking at there, like, I'm sorry, like you see this young man slapping himself in the face. There's no other excuse or other reason than I think what the prosecution is putting forward in this case. Now, Terry, the trial has been delayed twice now because Ray has had 2 seizures. Do you think it's possible the trial could be suspended because of his health issues?
You know, that's a distinct possibility, but I hope that is not the case. We know that this alleged behavior began way back in 2010. That's a long time ago. We're finally getting this case to trial. And, you know, if we have a further delay, if in fact he is ill and can't be prosecuted, then there's never going to be any justice here. Having 2 seizures in one day is quite a bit of medical emergency. And we very well could see that they're going to have to suspend the trial until he has his health back. So we'll see what happens. But frankly, he was taken out on a stretcher and he looked as though he was really in some medical distress. So hopefully the trial will be able to continue.
Yeah, we've seen some long delays. Don't forget the Robert Durst trial, some cases with COVID that have caused delays. So maybe that happens here in the Lawrence Ray trial, maybe a week delay, maybe less than that. But we'll see how that goes. And of course, give you updates here on Law and Crime Daily. Dina, Terry, thank you as always. And thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.